This episode of Around the Layout is brought to you by Weather My Trains. Hey, are you like me and the thought of doing a DIY weathering job on an expensive engine leaves you in fear? It's time to call in Rob Arsenault at Weather My Trains. Do what thousands of satisfied customers have done and let Rob help you notch up the realism on your layout with beautifully detailed weathering on your locomotives and rolling stock. To see what Rob can do for you, check out his website at weathermytrains.com. Hello, everybody, and welcome to Around the Layout, where model railroaders come to tell their story. My name is Ray Arnott. So glad you could join us. Joining me on today's episode, Matt Forcum. Matt, welcome to the show.
Hey, thanks for having me here. I've been a big fan since the very first episode. One of my absolute favorite things is to listen to other model railroaders talk about their layouts and their journey and stuff. So I'm just really excited to be here today and to be able to join in the conversation.
Well, I am really glad to have you here. I appreciate you listening, and it's awesome to be able to have a conversation with you. You've got a lot of great stuff going with your YouTube channel and then your Metaline Falls Railroad that you cover on the YouTube channel. So we've got a lot to talk about in the next hour. So let's get right into it. Tell me, how did you get started in the model railroading hobby?
Oh, man. It's kind of interesting. I don't know how interesting it is. We'll find out, I guess. I built my first layout. I think I was a freshman. If memory serves, I was a freshman in high school. And I had displayed an interest in model railroading for a couple of years prior to that. I'm one of these guys that kind of jumps from hobby to hobby fairly quickly. I see something, and I want it. I chase after it. And then I'm really excited for it for about 4 months, and then it goes away. So my parents, I think, wisely didn't let me sort of just go hog wild with a layout in the basement right away. If memory serves, the first thing they did was get me a subscription to Model Railroader magazine. And I think I spent about a year reading Model Railroader, kind of learning, the process of building a layout. I think there was one of the project railroads they had in the magazine at the time that, every month they would kind of show a few extra steps of how they built the layout, and kind of learned through there and through some books that I had rented from the library, how model railroads are built before I actually had an opportunity to build my first model railroad, which was a 4x8 layout. My parents finally gave me a very small corner and kind of an odd shaped area of my basement for me to build a layout. And so I built a 4x8 HO scale layout kind of up against two walls. And that was the worst thing that I could have possibly done, because two sides of this layout was easily accessible, but those back two sides were not.
Yeah, 4 feet and 8 feet is a long reach, that's for sure.
It is. And yeah. I'm not super big myself, so there was a lot of, reaching, and it was too much layout for me for my first layout at that time. And I became very frustrated very quickly, and it didn't get much further than getting track laid down. And I'm not even sure I had, all the track in place. I had purchased like a Bachmann, train set. And I think I had another Athearn, a little switcher that I had purchased as well. A couple of box cars or something like that. I didn't get very far before I sort of just gave up, and I just sat there for a while, and my dad finally made me take it down. A couple of years go by, I'm in high school, I'm doing the cars and the girls thing and everything. And eventually I get the bug again. I get really excited about building yet another model railroad. Only this time I was smarter about it. I went N scale, and I built a layout on a small door, like you do, with table legs that that can fold up on the bottom, and so I can slide it underneath my bed when I'm not working on it. And that layout actually got pretty much done. I got all the scenery done on it, buildings, track, I ballasted. That was a great layout to kind of cut my teeth on, if you will, because it was small enough that I could work on it when I was interested. And then, as my interest moved to different things, I could put it away for a little while and then bring it back out again. Yeah. I actually took that layout with me from Decatur, Illinois to Savannah, Georgia. I shoved it in the back of a 85 Mercury Capri and drove all the way down to Savannah, Georgia with it when I went to college. And it stayed with me in college in the back of a closet. And I pulled out occasionally and run some trains around in circles on it.
That's awesome.
Yeah. And so that was sort of how things sort of began. When I got through with college, I got out and I was focused on building a career, getting married,
Yeah.
having a kid. And so I kind of got out of model railroading for a long while. And I got into other hobbies. I got into, among other things, I got into Lego as an adult.
Okay.
This was like early to mid 2000s. I'm working with Lego, and I got a pretty good size collection. And then I get the sort of the bug for model railroading again, but I still have this like Lego thing going on. So I'm thinking to myself, well, how can I take the two and put them together? I decided I was going to build a Lego model railroad, which at the time, guys who were into Lego were doing a little bit of, they were building locomotives and rail cars and running around in circles and stuff, but they weren't really taking a lot of the concepts of model railroading, scenery and operations, and you're building a table and you're trying to recreate a whole world as opposed to just a couple of models here and there. I remember, if I was going to do this whole Lego model railroad thing, I needed to give it some grounding, because Lego in and of itself is a very sort of whimsical, magical kind of fun thing. And so if I wanted to kind of take some of the world of model railroading and bring it into Lego, I needed some grounding there. So I knew I liked 2-bay covered hoppers, and I knew I liked the Pacific Northwest. So I kind of just pulled out a map one day and said, where can I find the cement industry in the Pacific Northwest? And I found a little town called Metaline, I should say. It's pronounced Metaline Falls. I say Metaline in my brain all the time, and then I get corrected occasionally. It's Metaline, not Metaline, but Metaline Falls in Washington State. And it had a little cement industry, and there was a little short line that ran trains up and down the line there. And there wasn't really anyone else out there kind of doing that kind of thing. So I felt I was pretty safe to kind of take that little piece of the country and mold it and shape it and make it my own. And so it started as just a name, an excuse for me to kind of play with Lego. Eventually I remember one day I was working on building a mountain out of Lego, and I had about $300 worth of green Lego bricks. And I had built what was probably about a third of a mountain. And I was said to myself, I was like, what am I doing? I'm spending all this money on Lego bricks to build something that is not very substantial at all in the grand scheme of things. And Lego's very expensive.
Yeah, you can buy a lot of plaster cloth for $300. That's for sure.
Exactly. And so at about that time, then I got, as I was researching Metaline Falls and the area, and I started getting more and more interested in traditional model railroading, I'll say, HO scale model railroading. And about that time, I discovered YouTube, and there were people putting videos on YouTube with locomotives with sound. It was something when I was a kid that locomotives didn't have, now they had sound. And now the cars that you could buy like straight out of the box had wire grab irons and photo etched roof walks and all sorts of like crazy details that were just a pipe dream when I was a kid. And I was just so excited and enthralled by that. And that got me back into, back out of my dark ages, if you will, and back into model railroading proper.
Yeah. Before we get too far away from the Lego Railroad part of your journey, I got some questions, because I've seen, I've gone to, Amherst and other shows, and you see, Lego railroads, and it's neat. I mean, a lot of stuff. And I really didn't, one thing that you said kind of kicked in my mind. It's not just the railroad that's Lego. It's like everything on it can be Lego.
Yeah. If you're doing it right. So
that's a lot of pieces of Lego, but tell us a little bit more about Lego railroading and kind of what it's like. I mean, how far you got with it, and I mean, how does it compare? I mean, model railroading, we talk about track plans and maybe operating it. Sure. I mean, how far can you get in the Lego railroad side of things?
I compare it quite a bit to like Lionel trains, like old scale Lionel classic toy train kind of feel. They're much larger than an HO scale locomotive. They don't have you don't have the fine control over movement, so you're not really you can't really crawl along, and there's no momentum or anything like that. All the cars kind of magnetize together. So it's very toy-like in its nature, and to its advantage, I think. I mean, Lego, there's a certain like quality to Lego, a sort of whimsical, classic quality to it that I think makes it wonderful. I mean, I'm still a big fan of it to this day. I'm in my mid 40s at this point and still play with Lego. So, I mean, there's that quality to it. A lot of the guys who do the whole Lego train scene, a lot of it is how realistic can I make this while still maintaining the Lego-ness of it, right?
Yeah.
I mean, you can, depending on the size you work, you can make a Lego steam locomotive look pretty darn good.
Yeah.
And the challenge of working with the Lego brick, knowing that like you have a limited palette. I mean, there's tons of different types of pieces, but there's limited ways you can put things together. It's kind of a big puzzle. It's a puzzle with no solution that's sort of been figured out for you. You know, you come up with a solution along the way in order to make the final model. So I find it to be a great mental challenge. It's a lot of fun to do. At the end of the day, model railroading is my first hobby. So my greatest hobby. So I do love the more traditional sort of, plaster cloth, and I like getting my hands dirty, and I like the look and feel of HO scale modeling and all that, the realism that comes with that. So it's different, certainly the Lego side of things, but I still consider it model railroading in a lot of ways. It's just a very, very different kind of model railroading.
And it seems like that too. I mean, you and I are about the same age. We're in our mid 40s, and boy, Legos have certainly come a far way from when we were younger. I remember getting like buckets of them in different colors, and, usually had, and then if you needed a shape, you had to steal it out of some kit. Like I had like a Shell gas station or something, and, had some round parts, and you could kind of be a little bit more creative with them. But I'm built stuff with Legos, but nothing ever to that extreme. That it's amazing that what can be done with them. And I think it's a great gateway. I mean, especially for kids and even adults that want to, build and have that creativity. I mean, certainly Legos is a great place to get in.
Yeah, absolutely.
So let's get back to you're figuring out that $300 worth of green Legos isn't where you want to be with you're building scenery with it. Yeah. So tell us how you get back into the model railroading hobby.
Well, I think I think I got to a point where there was a sort of a point of no return. Either I was going to continue down this route of just spending an insane amount of money on Lego to build out this idea of a Lego model railroad, or I was going to really start to explore getting back into HO scale modeling again. And about that time, I think I found Mike Confalone's Woodsville Terminal, which I don't remember if he had been building his larger Allagash Railroad at that time, and the Woodsville Terminal was just a piece of it. But in my mind, at least how it was presented in Model Railroader magazine, it was just a self-contained layout. And it was, if I remember correctly, it was like 13 feet long or something like that. It was fairly small, narrow. It was a shelf layout essentially, which was another concept that was fairly new to me at that time. I was used to model railroads being these expansive basement filling empires. And although I had known that a lot of the guys over in England had been doing smaller layouts, I think Ian Rice had done a number of designs for Model Railroader magazine. Seeing Mike Confalone's layout and seeing there was some video he had shot at the time as well, him operating the train kind of slowly, pushing cars around. It reminded me of what I had done with the N scale layout, in that it was small and it seemed feasible. It seemed doable. It seemed like something that a guy like me, who is easily distracted by other hobbies, could achieve something like this. I had a small room. It was about 10 feet by, 8-ish feet, very, very small room in the basement. And I had one wall of that room, which I could dedicate to a small shelf style layout like this. And so I began looking into that side of the hobby, which I'm very, very glad that I did, because I don't know that I would have gotten back into model railroading if in my mind it still was either a very small loop on a door or a giant basement filling empire. When you discover that there's this kind of middle ground where you can still you can model at a very high level of detail and great operations as well, and still have a lot of fun with it. without spending the kind of money that a lot of the guys that are filling their basements with trains have to spend. For somebody like me who at the time didn't have a lot of that money, it was a very exciting prospect.
Yeah, for sure. I've been saying for a little while on the show here, and I'll say it again. I think that the shelf layout has become the next great revolution of model railroading.
Yeah.
Yeah, maybe shelf, when they, end scaled, layout on a door kind of kicked that off, or, there was these, but this is such a huge revolution because I really do think that, in that there was an era, and maybe when we were both younger, that it was about the empire,
Mm-hmm.
right? Everything was about big, clear your basement and build a massive empire. And no, they're beautiful. Don't get me wrong. I think they're absolutely fantastic, but it's, achievable for more people to be able to do that smaller layout.
Right.
The ones that we mentioned on the show, like Tom Johnson, and you can put it in a room and just go to town on uber detail, that super detailing stuff. That's just amazing. And I really think that stems from that mindset of change of it doesn't have to be, a ton of running. It can be this, switching layout or,
exactly.
These kinds of things. I think it really is. And it just it allows more people the opportunity to walk through the door into our hobby.
Well, and I mean, in my mind up to that point, layouts, even small layouts were 4x8 foot layouts, which when you put them in a room, they take up a lot of space. And I think if you are just getting into model railroading, the amount of space that something like that takes up can be pretty daunting. It can be difficult to convince parents to let you have the space, or a wife to let you have the space,
Right.
I mean, unless you're going to stick it up against a corner of a wall, which I learned very quickly was not the way to do it, right? You need to be able to have it accessible from multiple sides. So having a shelf layout, something that you could put on bookcases or, up against that one wall that's not being used in a basement,
Right.
or, a spare garage or whatever it might end up being, you can do that and, learn a lot about model railroading along the way, find what you like to do in operations, find what you like to do in scenery, that kind of thing. And then who knows, you might decide, well, hey, I can kind of, expand off this one edge over here onto this other wall. Now I've got an L-shaped model railroad, and hey, maybe I can go on this third wall here. Now it's U-shaped, and eventually you got a basement empire, right?
It's
but
it's
you
funny.
can tackle it a little bit at a time,
Exactly. It's like you said, knowing yourself and knowing your why, kind of the Lance Minheim kind of things that we had talked about on that podcast with Lance, and and like you mentioned, what's achievable for you. Yeah. What is it that you can do? I've got multiple hobbies as well, including the one we're doing right now. Mm-hmm. So, can I right now afford the time with young kids in our mid 40s to try to build a model, a massive model railroad and be realistic about it?
Yeah.
I know I can't, but I can manage a little shelf layout, and and I think that's where a lot of people. I mean, Paul Cassar, my executive producer here at the podcast, he runs the HO Scale Shelf Modelers Group, 16,500 people in that group. And that's just the ones that know about it, right? That's an amazing amount of people that are focused on that shelf layout concept. And I think there's just far many more that have gotten into the hobby on that new idea.
Yeah. And I've kept that concept with me. I'm now, my wife and I bought this house a few years back, and when we went shopping for a home, shopping for a house that we intended to live in until, my wife ends up burying me under the stairs. That's what I always say. But, and so one of the things on my list was I wanted that basement room so that I could build that model railroad that, like, I had always sort of dreamed about in my head. And we found this house, had a very large, pre-finished basement space that was about 14 by about 40 feet. And the first thing I did was I cut that space in half. I built a wall down the middle because I didn't want all of that space sort of,
you're putting a regulation on yourself like your parents did,
exactly.
Aren't you? By putting a wall up. Yeah.
I know my limitations, and I know what I want to achieve with model railroading. If I had all that space, it would be far less likely that I'd be able to achieve that. So the first thing I did was cut that space in half. And it's like, nope, this is the space I'm going to work with. And these are the constraints I'm putting on myself to make sure that I would be able to eventually achieve someday, as slowly as I start to, continue to work on it. achieve what my goals are for the layout.
Yeah, that's a nice piece of room anyway. I mean, you've got a nice space and, finished. I mean, no folks that can't see the video, obviously, here an audio podcast, but I can see in there you've got a nice drop ceiling and, things are finished in there, which is always nice to see in a layout room.
Yeah. It is nice. It keeps dust off the layout, and it makes it nice to work in, at the end of a long, hard work day, it can come down to a space that feels nice to be in. And so, yeah, I definitely like that part of it.
Nice. So you move into your forever home. How quickly is the track plan in your head?
Well, it's funny. If you take a look at some of the early videos about this particular layout, I had taken that little shelf layout that I had built in the other house and put it into this basement. I had built it in a couple of sections so I could pull it apart and move it one day. That was the intention. And I put it in this basement, and I was just going to kind of maybe rework the staging a little bit so that it would fit within the space that I had built for myself, and kind of just let it go and see what happens and expand it from there. And I got it in the basement and got up against the wall, and I said, well, you know what? If I was building it for this space, I probably wouldn't have put the main line towards the back. I would have brought it towards the front. And if I'm building for the space, I probably would have added another 2 feet onto this section over here so I can make this industrial lead a little bit longer. And I would have moved the bridge over here, and I would have put the tunnel, so eventually so it was like, heck with it. I'm going to start all over from the beginning. Yeah. And the design process went fairly quickly, I think. It helped that I had done quite a bit of research on the area that I was modeling leading up to that point. So I had a pretty good idea of what I wanted to do, what I wanted to represent. There were a couple of surprises along the way. Figuring out where I was going to put staging, I think, was the hardest part of it. I mean, I was working on my other house, getting that sort of ready to sell as I was, moving things into this house. So as I'm doing drywall and stuff in the other house, all I'm thinking about in my head is this layout, and that was sort of the treat. Like, I'm going to finish the other house, and then I'm going to, my treat is to get started on bench work on this thing. So
yeah, some good motivation there. Mm-hmm. Talk about the research process of learning about this, sure. the Metaline Falls area, and how you even, landed on that. Let's talk a bit about that.
Yeah. So like I said earlier, it was just kind of a cool name and an area of the country that I enjoyed. I enjoy the Pacific Northwest, and I like 2-bay covered hoppers, and there was a cement factory there, right? So that was just how it started. And as I sort of began learning a little bit more about the area, there is a short line that runs there called the Pondere Valley Railroad. It's a real short line. And as I'm learning more and more about the railroad and the history of the area, I'm falling more in love with it. And I'm a freelance modeler at heart. I consider myself an artist, so I'm one of those guys. I don't want to be sort of necessarily tied down. I don't want to have to necessarily feel like, I'm going to, I have to model the yard in this way because this is what the real railroad does. I have to do operations this way because this is what the real railroad does. Right. I like logo design. So I wanted to have my own logo. I wanted to run the locomotives I wanted to run. I wanted to run the cars I want to run. So I have that sort of freelancer spirit, but as I am researching more and more about the area, I'm just falling more and more in love with the real railroad and how the real short line runs and the area it runs through and all that. And so what started as a very sort of ethereal, sort of just name and place kind of thing eventually coalesced into what I have now, which is a pretty darn accurate representation of the actual Pondere Valley Railroad, with a couple of changes here and there to sort of satisfy my wants and desires. And yeah, I mean, I still consider myself a freelance modeler because I allow myself that sort of flexibility and freedom, and I am kind of doing my own little thing. But so much of it is influenced by the real railroad that there's definitely a lot of prototype modeler in me now as well, I think.
One of the neat things that I've learned while doing this podcast is about freelance model railroading. And I'll be honest, my initial assessment or understanding of freelance model railroading was that it was pretty easy. You just come up with a name and you just make stuff up as you go. But after an interview with Chris Palmieri and learning just how much goes into a freelance model railroad, I learned maybe it's a little bit harder. You don't get handed this complete script from the prototype. You're creating your own. And it's likely inspired by a prototype or a mix of prototypes, but it's still, you have to put all of that together. And it's really neat to hear you with the Metaline getting more information and adding that prototype information back into your freelance railroad.
Well, and I'll be honest, part of the reason why I consider myself a freelance model railroader, and I've always sort of gone that direction, is that I don't really know very much about prototype railroading. All of up until my adulthood, everything I kind of knew about railroads came from Model Railroader magazine. So it was a lot about the modeling. That was what was really, I found very fascinating about it. There were certain layouts at the time that like I really was drawn to, and certain areas of the country I was drawn to through the modeling that I saw on the pages of Model Railroader magazine. But I couldn't tell you, like even to this today, I can't tell you the difference between a lot of locomotives, modern, wide cab locomotives. I got friends who can tell by, the placement of the headlights, the month that it was produced. And it's that kind of thing is still very sort of very much a mystery to me. So I always felt that freelancing was easier because you could be a little bit easier on yourself. If you didn't have the operations quite right, well, that's fine because you're a freelance model. You just do whatever you want, right? But so in that aspect, it's easier. There is the aspect of like, well, you don't have a guide to help you along the way. So coming up with a convincing track plan that feels good and feels fun to operate, I think that is a little bit trickier. Like this latest layout that I've created, I think was the easiest track plan I've ever come up with. And the reason why is because I could go to Google Maps and I could see, what the real thing does. And all it really is just crushing it down and making it fit in the space,
Yeah, I'm kind of that guy too. I mean, I have a base idea. I can definitely tell you a difference between a GE and an EMD, and
sure,
I can pick those things out. But if if it's from a distance, I can't tell you if it's an AC 4400 CW or an ES for until, and I'm sure, and I see that, there's a level of, rivet counting that goes on out there where people would, point and say, oh, they never ran that. But with freelance, you can kind of, my story.
Yeah, exactly.
And you get to tell that.
Well, and I'm excited to learn all that stuff, as an adult now, I'm starting to kind of get into that kind of thing. And so slowly I'm starting to soak that stuff in. And so, as I move forward in my model railroading career, I'm looking very, very much to finding some of that stuff out.
Yeah. And it's a constant learning thing too, where you get to, that's what's really neat about the hobby is that it's just all inclusive. There's so much that you can learn about anything. You want to focus on just one single micro topic. You can even go down a wormhole and be there for a long time just on that little thing.
Yeah, absolutely.
So when you're doing this research, you're learning about this line, where the Metaline Falls Railroad is being based off of. What were some of the things that kind of surprised you as you were doing your research?
Well, one of the biggest surprises, the big draw that I had to the line to begin with was the cement factory. And one of the biggest surprises for me was learning that I love modern short lines and that cement factory hadn't been worked since like the mid 90s. So I was like, oh, shoot. Some of the big surprises, I think, overall is just learning how, with short lines, something like a cement industry, like closing up shop, can have a huge effect on the prosperity of the short line. Everything all up and down the line there. The Pend Valley Railroad, as it currently exists today, is really kind of struggling. And I've sort of, over the years, I've watched that struggle a little bit. There's a very large bridge that sort of is right smack dab in the middle of the line. and there was a excursion train that would go up and over that bridge in the fall every year, take customers, people up to the Metaline Falls area, bring them back down. Beautiful scenery, beautiful bridge. I mean, about every photograph of this railroad that exists is of this particular bridge. And then some new rules came about that required them to have the bridge inspected and then make whatever repairs on the bridge and the line that were required in order to continue operating on that line. Well, that was going to end up costing, I think somebody said around $12 million or $15 million, something like that, to do the inspection and the repairs of the bridge and the line to continue operating. And all the funds that they earned from that excursion train every year would go towards buying the kids in the local community, like football gear, stuff that they needed for schools and stuff. Now they can't do that anymore. So half the line has kind of been cut off because they can no longer, use this bridge. And it's sad. But that's part that on the other hand, the drama that kind of comes from that is what makes shortline railroading so interesting to me. Because in the shortline, the railroad has to shift operations a little bit and, rethink how they do things a little bit in order to still stay profitable, and support the community however they can. That kind of stuff's been really fascinating to sort of follow as I build out my own version of the railroad.
Now you bring up a very interesting point about, the economics of railroading,
Mm-hmm.
of the prototype where, what if that one big customer falls offline?
Yeah.
Then what do you do? It's not like trucking where you can, we'll simply just pick up another customer. No, you gotta have property and a rail line to go to them, especially and that's why, final mile with railroading can be all very, very difficult. You get a customer like that, a major, they take in a lot of cars and
Mm-hmm.
all of a sudden, poof, they're gone, or they decide, the property here isn't, we're going to move because the demand for concrete isn't nearly as big over here as it is across town. And we can put a plant across town.
Exactly. Yeah.
The railroad don't reach there. So you can see the challenge, just from the surface, let alone all the economics that I don't understand of how challenging it can be to run a short line railroad.
Mm-hmm. Yep. Yeah. And trying to sort of court industry to come into your area. Hey, we've got a railroad here that can serve you. Well, but then you got to build a factory, or you got to clear land, and there's all this expense that comes along with that. It's very interesting. It's completely different than what I do, for a living. And so being removed from it, I think I find it very interesting. If I had to work it every day, it'd be difficult probably.
For sure. But it definitely is a neat thing to learn about.
Sure.
So for your railroad, are you kind of protesting and keeping the cement plant open?
Absolutely. So I am modeling the year 2016, which is the final year that the bridge was open. So I'm that's my cutoff. So all these new fancy new cars and locomotives that I see coming out, I can't buy them.
Yeah.
That's the way of sort of keeping my wallet happy. But yeah, I have the cement industry in my freelance world. That original factory was getting kind of old. It had been around since the early 1900s anyway. So they needed to build a new factory. So they're going to build it further down the line so that, the railroad doesn't have to go quite as far to bring goods up to the industry. They don't have to worry about the bridge or all the tunnels or washouts that might occur and all that kind of stuff. So,
right.
About 20 miles down the line, they build a brand new cement factory, and then everyone's happy, at least on my railroad. That's how it goes.
That's right. That's right. And in your world and your story, that's that all can happen. That's what's really cool about, keeping this freelance mentality and being able to do that.
Absolutely.
So you're building this. How many changes from this? You're over at your old house, you're putting up, fixing drywall, and you've got this plan in your head. Talk about the evolutions of this layout and how many different changes you kind of make, and maybe some of the big changes you make from what you originally thought you were going to have.
Well, this is where I think it's really important if you can, to get out and take a look at what other people are doing, not just on YouTube, but actually go over to their house and operate on their layouts.
Oh, for sure.
Because up until that point, I knew nobody. I was a lone wolf because, well, the internet hadn't really been invented at that point, so there was nobody
Right.
to play trains with. And then when it finally did, who am I? Like, I don't know anyone around here. I'm just a guy in his basement. And it took a little while before I started to find people found me, I guess, online. I had made offhanded joke about how I was moving to Dunlap on the Model Railroad hobbyist forums one time. And then a guy emails me. He says, "Hey, I live in Dunlap." And so he invited me over to his house, and I operated on his layout. And he's got a much larger double deck layout, basement spanning empire kind of thing. Really fantastic layout. But I got to do the type of model railroading that I hadn't, or type of operations, I should say, that I hadn't done up to that point. Which up to that point, I've got a small shelf layout, so I'm doing switching. I'm bringing stuff in from staging, spotting them at industries, pulling stuff from industries, back in staging again. That's it. Right. His layout was the first time I operated on somebody else's layout, which I was very nervous about because, again, I don't know hardly anything. Everything I know about operations I learned from the pages of Model Railroader magazine, and I forget half of that, right? And whatever I do on my own layout, and I have no clue whether it's right or not. I just do it. So doing it on his layout for the first time with his equipment, surrounded by like 15 other guys who are also like, way more experienced than me. I was working a steel mill, which is you pull cars, do all that, put it on the siding, get ready to, get ready for another train to come and take it. And then part of my job was then to get that other train, a road train, to come on by, pick up those cars, drop off some other cars, and then go back into staging with that road train. And it was like a light bulb went off to me, because when you're dealing with a short line, you're kind of like, you're boxed into this you do your little job every day. You do your 5 moves or whatever it might be every day. And then the rest of the railroad kind of does something. It's off there. It's in the ether. You don't really understand how any of that works. Cars go away, cars come back, that kind of thing. But to actually have a train come from staging to pick up the work that you had just done and then go back again as if it's taking it somewhere else, that was a huge light bulb moment for me. And I knew that at that point I had to include that in my own layout. So I made sure that the interchange at Sandpoint was there, so I had a place to drop off cars and then to bring a train from staging to grab those cars, leave more cars at the interchange, go back into staging. And so it just brought more of the rest of the world into my layout room than I was originally anticipating. And by, it's not complicating the operation experience too much, but it's bringing in yard operations, it's bringing in, classifying cars and that kind of thing as well. So it's bringing in a lot of opportunities that I just wouldn't have even considered had I not gotten out of my basement and gone to somebody else's house and tried out something new on their layout.
Yeah, by doing that, you're completing the loop, right? You're
exactly,
giving your railroad purpose. Now it's not just moving this car back and forth or moving it to the end and then it's doing what the railroad does. It moves commodities, from place to place. And by adding that staging, by adding that yard, and now you've got some classification going on. That definitely gives it more purpose and certainly opens up for many more operating opportunities.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. It as I operate the layout now, like half of an operating session is just grabbing those cars, putting the other cars out, and then classifying those and getting ready to do, the work of the short line at that point. So,
definitely expands upon it. Another great point, and again, I've said this a multitude of times about going to other people's layouts and taking home, things. So you've got this. I mean, who do you got in your neighborhood? I mean, as far as operating, do you got a lot of folks in your area that you've met through this hobby?
Yeah, there's a few. So Alan Setkamp, who you had on a previous episode, I've operated on his layout more than I've operated on my own at this point. He's been really good mentor as far as learning operations and stuff goes. Isaac Fabris, who's a guy whose name apparently comes up, it seems, every episode.
Isaac. Yeah.
I love him so much because he's been, I will tend to put off getting something done because I'm afraid to just jump in there and screw it up. And he's the guy that says, it's fine, screw it up, I'll fix it for you. You know, like,
That's awesome. Yeah.
So he's been really helpful for me as far as keeping me moving on the layout. You know, it's an interesting, this area of I live in central Illinois. So this area has kind of an interesting group of guys. I don't get out all the time to go operating with them. I still kind of feel like I'm the new guy in some ways. I've only been doing it for a couple of years now, and they've been operating, you know, amongst themselves for quite a long time. So they know each other very well at this point. But yeah, I mean, I'm glad when I can get out to get over their houses, and everyone's been very nice so far with me and very understanding that I'm still in some ways, I'm still kind of learning the ropes, if you will.
Yeah, well, I'll tell you, I've got two good ones there with Alan. Alan was a joy to talk to, and his love of having people to his layout to operate was certainly fascinating. You know, he just loves to have people there and be a part of it. And then Isaac is just super, and you know, very talented modeler. So yeah, you've networked yourself well there out in central Illinois.
I got very lucky, that's for sure.
Yeah, it's definitely good. And sometimes it does take a community and a community effort to learn the hobby. Yeah. And speaking of that, we'll roll into talk about your YouTube channel, because you've been sharing what you learn, which is really a cool thing. So talk a little bit about how you started this, the YouTube channel that kind of follows your railroad and more. Yeah,
sure. There were a couple of guys who had been, they had started, video vlogs or video diaries, or whatever you want to call it. They're sort of their journey building their own layouts. BA Rail Systems, who's the guy, I think he's in Canada, who is building a very large layout in his basement. Another guy, Railfan 220, who's pretty popular right now. He's building the BNSF Marias Pass. Him and I actually have become good friends in recent years, and I talk to him almost every day about model railroading, which is a lot of fun. But those guys were just documenting their process, and I'm a guy who I love the process. I love, as much as I love running trains, you know, the finished product is great, but the journey towards that finished product, I think, is just as fascinating. I agree. And I just kind of wanted to share my journey with others. I had built a few layouts at that point. I had made a lot of mistakes, and I'd been in the forums, and I'd seen people asking a lot of the questions that I was asking back in the day. And I knew that, like, I had an opportunity to, as I'm building out this new layout, share that with others, and do so in a way that, like, allowed me to give some simple tutorials along the way. If I make a mistake, I share it as well, because I want, you know, people to learn from that as well. And also the YouTube channel would force me in some ways to keep going with it, right? Because then I would have an audience, and people would be wondering what I would be doing. And, you know, even if they don't reach out necessarily and say, hey, you know, you haven't posted in 4 months, are you okay? I know they're out there, and they're excited, and they're waiting for the next update. And so it sort of keeps me on my toes a little bit there as well.
Yeah, I think you've done the smart thing. I talk about, you know, with the podcast is, you know, the layout suffers for the podcast because I'm sitting up here in the office, you know, kind of above my layout, but you've created something that kind of motivates you to continue working on your layout and produce those videos. So that was a wise approach.
Yeah. And I try to do it as low tech as possible as well, because if I have to, I've part of my past job life, if you will, was a video producer. So I did a lot of video editing, directing, and a little bit of video production as well on top of that, although I wasn't very good at it. And so I knew that, like, I could get in over my head, not over my head, but I could get to a spot where I was dedicating so much time to the YouTube channel that I wasn't getting anything done on the layout. So I needed to find that sort of happy middle ground where I could produce videos that I consider to be good enough. I think they could be better, but do it in a way that didn't necessarily, like, take up so much time, so that I could devote as much time as possible to actually doing the work of building the layout, right? Which is what everyone is there for anyway, you know? Right.
Well, I certainly think a lot of great things out of that, and in the mentality that you have, that, you know, you're sharing your journey, you're journalizing it through video. Mm-hmm. There's a lot to be learned from everybody. You know, we talk about visiting layouts, but even YouTube channels and seeing other people and their approach, or perhaps you explain it, and it may be the same topic that's covered in 3, 4, 5 or more different YouTube channels. But when you may describe it just slightly different, where somebody else gets it more than, say, another video. It it gives a wider coverage to that, and an understanding, and there's so much to be learned about or learned from layouts that are being built. Yeah. You can go to completed layouts and you can see it, but when you get to, kind of dissect with a layout that isn't complete, it's like, it's like an autopsy. You get to see the insides and, how did he create that mountain? Or maybe he's got it half done. Okay, now I can see it and get a visual, because completed layouts can be overwhelming, especially for somebody that's new. They go, oh my God. But in reality, it's not overly just, and then you get to see the steps along and say, that's achievable. That can be done. I can understand it. I can see it be happening. So I believe these YouTube channels like the one you've created are invaluable to the education of fellow model railroaders.
Yeah. And when you look at it too, a model railroad, for 95% of its life, it's under construction. It's a plywood Pacific or something along that lines, right?
Sure.
And so if you only really ever focus on sharing your layout once it's done, there's only part of the life that really gets to be shared with everyone else. And one of the things that makes model railroading so unique is it's a hobby you got to dedicate some time and energy to. This is a model railroad is not done in 6 months. A small one might be done in a year, but a room size layout, it's going to be years before it's to a point where you could be considered quote unquote done. Model railroads are never really done, but and so if you don't bother sharing that with people, there's a large part of the hobby that is just not being shared.
Yeah, you're robbing us of the chance to get to see it. So share it out. Yeah, for sure. Okay. So also on this channel, and it's MFR or MFRailroad on YouTube.
Yep.
84 videos as of my last count. Maybe you've put up a few more because these are maybe a week or two old notes. Your layout updates up there. You've done some how-to videos that are really nice. You showed about your panels and how you made those, which was really cool. I love that clean finish stuff, the panels that look real nice, and and you've done an excellent job, and you've shown how to do that. You've done some product reviews. You've been doing some live workbench work sessions, which have been really fun to watch and get to see you do things and learn from that. And then one thing you've done that's been, I call this pretty brave, is you've got these videos called your Rail Ramblin, and I listened to at least one, and we won't go into the topic, but I mean, because you definitely should go to his channel and listen to these. But one thing I credit you for, it takes a lot of bravery to put out an opinion about model railroading, because I think we're all very opinionated people in this hobby. And it takes a high level of bravery. And what's nice to see, and hopefully, it's not you don't have to overly moderate to get this, is that good, friendly, debatable discussion without going too far over the edge. But it takes a lot of guts to stick out an opinion like you've done on these.
Yeah, I want to get more into that than I have. I sort of dropped off of that for a little while. I started doing it because I was early in the construction process, and all I really had was a bunch of wood to show off. Here's some wood this week, and then next week I put some more wood up. So I needed something else to sort of fill out the channel a little bit, and I like reading discussions, but I also like hearing people discuss things. I love model railroad podcasts because of that. And I think there's a lot to this hobby, and there's a lot of fascinating topics. And I don't know that I've ever gotten too taboo with anything that I discuss, but there's a lot of like questions that I would have had early on, or if I was just getting in the hobby for the very first time now, that I might have questions about, do I really need to spend, $50 on a car or $300 on a locomotive? Do I really need to do that? The answer is of course not. But the answer is, maybe, right? Depending on what you want. And I think that could be a question that would be I could see myself being the kind of person that would be hesitant to ask a question like that, not knowing much about the hobby, afraid of what the answer might be, because frankly, sometimes people are not too kind with their answers and stuff. So I want to be able to discuss that from my perspective in a way that kind of gives people a little more information. It's kind of, kind of interesting at the same time.
I think one of the things this keeps coming back in my head, and I think I mentioned it on the podcast with Lucy Dormont that just released in Tony Cook. We did a What's Happening in Model Railroading, and if you haven't heard that, go back and listen. But we were talking about, and I kind of joked, I get that Sammy Hagar song stuck in my head, There's Only One Way to Rock, which was completely wrong. There's about 1,000 ways to rock. And he could write a song that, there's only one way to model railroad, and he'd be wrong too. It's like there's thousands of ways to model railroad. And keeping that open mind, and as people explore the hobby and learn their niche in the hobby, to kind of have that open-mindedness to say, what they're doing isn't wrong. It may not be right for you, but it's definitely not wrong. And allowing them to find what they really love about railroading and model railroading.
Yeah, we do take this hobby very, very seriously as model railroaders, and for good reason. It is a hobby that is almost a lifestyle in some ways, because progress on a model railroad generally takes years, and it takes lots of research and dedication and time, and just learning new skills along the way. And so we all, at the end of the day, we get opinions, and we get very opinionated because of it. And when we see somebody doing something slightly different than how we would do it, we tend to let them know pretty darn quick, right?
Yeah.
And I think that's something we have to keep in mind as we go forward, as we are looking to bring more people into this hobby, that we were all there once, right? We all had our Bachmann train sets that we had slapped on a piece of plywood and stuck in the corner of our basement so we couldn't reach the backside of it. We all did that at one time. We just have to keep that in mind as we are looking to help others as well.
As I said before, they don't put Master Model Railroader on your birth certificate. It's a learned process that takes time, and a lot of people have had humble beginnings, and you just got to remember those humble beginnings and be able to be a good representative of the hobby.
Yeah, absolutely.
So let's talk about something that you've created here, and in part of your videos, you created this software here. Why don't you tell us about Ops Buddy?
Yeah. So Ops Buddy came about. I had finally, after kind of years of slowly working on this layout, gotten to a point where I could actually bring somebody else into the basement and then start operating on the layout itself. And up until that point, I had kind of just pushed cars around the layout a little bit. My layout runs in a big circle, so I'd run cars in circles, or run trains in circles all the time. My son, who's 3 years old, he'd come down here with me and stand on a chair and watch trains run in circles. And I had the plan of what I wanted the layout to do from the very beginning as I, put together the track plan. And it just took a while to kind of get to that point. So here I am. I'm getting ready to have my first op session, and I'm working with a couple of the bigger pieces of switchless software out there. I'll just say it, JMRI and the switchless app for Mac. And they're great. They're great pieces of software. I just couldn't get it to work for myself. And, I'm not like really super great with computers. I hold my own. I mean, I work on computers for a living, but they can be kind of frustrating, especially when I'm looking to get something done. I'm working with the program. I'm working with it. I'm on the forums. I'm on the Facebook pages. I'm not finding the answers, or I'm slowly getting some success, but then I'm sort of falling off the wagon in other areas. And it just got to a point where it's like, man, like I almost feel like I could just do this myself and have better results. So I started looking into like, well, how can I, because what I'm wanting to do is not too super difficult. It's just, so what happened was because I have a smaller layout, I have fewer industries. I have 5 industries total.
Right.
I have very few spurs that I'm going to be putting cars on or taking cars off. There's the complication of the interchange yard and the classifying of the cars and stuff that comes along with it. But like, honestly, it's a pretty small layout. And what I want from this layout is I want it to feel fresh every time I pick up the throttle. Because I don't have a big, complicated thing that's happening here. It's pretty small, pretty straightforward. There's an opportunity to for it to become stale if I'm just kind of doing the same thing over and over again. It's something that I ran into with my last shelf layout that I had in my old house. And so I wanted that randomness kind of to occur on my layout. And I just wasn't getting the kind of randomness I wanted from those other programs. It was just, sometimes it would work right. And then sometimes something really bizarre would happen. And, if there's one part of a small layout that's not jiving 100%, it can really kind of throw off an operating session.
Sure.
So what I ended up doing was, and I don't want to talk this up as if I created a whole piece of software. Essentially, I just took a spreadsheet application, called Google Sheets, and I put together a couple of tools within the spreadsheet that worked really well for me. That's really simple to use, and because it's not a piece of software, it's very flexible. So another modeler can take what I did and adjust it. Take a look at what I did, take a look at how it works for my layout, and then see how I can make this work on my layout if I adjust this here and here in this way. There's a couple of modelers that are actually doing that right now with the tool, making those adjustments for themselves. So it's really just a couple of simple tools. There's what's called a roll table, which is kind of a list of scenarios that can possibly happen for each industry. List of numbers assigned to those scenarios, and you roll a dice, either virtual or I like to roll a physical dice. And then depending on the results, that's what's going to happen with that particular industry on your operating session. And you can fine tune that for your own layout. So if you have an industry, you want to work approximately a third of the time, right? And then 2/3 of the time that industry doesn't get worked, you can make those adjustments by hand, by punching in the numbers that you want to assign the probability that dice roll will result in you working in that industry. And then you can dive down deeper from there and, well, what kind of cars am I going to deliver? Which tracks get filled, or, that kind of thing. And then the second part of that comes from a similar tool that a guy by the name of Bill Neely had created and shown off in the pages of Model Railroader magazine. And essentially what that was just cells in this spreadsheet where all your industries exist, all your cars exist within these cells. And you can just drag and drop cars from an industry spot onto your switch list. And then when you print that switch list out, you got a nice looking switch list. When you're done with it, then you move it from the switch list to its new position. So you never sort of lose position. You don't get yourself in a situation where, the computer thinks your cars are at industry A when in reality they're at industry B, right?
Yeah.
Because you've screwed it up somehow between the computer and the layout itself. So because you're manually handling all that stuff, it's much simpler in my opinion. At least it works for me. And I figured if it works for me, it might work for others. And the people who use it so far seem to think it's pretty good.
Yeah, what an awesome idea to share that out too. And I love that, the idea of randomness, because it is. I mean, the railroad is random. You'll see, it's not every, I've got a regional railroad right out my window here with the Providence and Worcester, and you go down and every day is a different looking train. It's not the same train every day.
Yeah.
Not every industry is receiving every day. Not every industry is receiving the same amount of cars every day. And when you can kind of throw that randomness in, and I love the dice roll idea. I've actually applied it to my small railroad on a switching job where you roll a dice and then there's a list of options. But I love what you've done there with your Ops Buddy Google Sheets here.
Yeah.
That you can actually build some randomness into your operating, and it just shakes that, especially for small railroads, because it's likely if you have operators over, they're going to run the same jobs, pretty quickly on top of each other.
Yeah.
To have it random, and it just makes it that much more fun.
Yeah. And yeah, exactly. With small layouts, small short lines, not every industry is going to be switched out every single day. Right.
Yeah.
Sometimes some industries a large industry might get, a fresh set of cars every day, but you may have a scrap yard that gets, cars very, very occasionally. And and when that dice roll pops up and, oh, hey, I get to work the scrapyard today. That's an exciting kind of thing that, doesn't happen every single time with an operating session. So it helps keep a very small layout feeling kind of fresh. I've run my layout with the Ops Buddy tool, I don't know, maybe 8 or 10 times now. And every time it's been slightly different, and it's been a little bit of a different puzzle every single time, which is great. And so it's worked out pretty well for me. The tool is free. So if you go to the Facebook page or my YouTube page, I got links to it. So, as long as you have a Google account, you just save the template, save it as your own, and you can go to town, do whatever it is you want to do with it.
Yeah, that's awesome. Going back to that again, that randomness can add the human factor to it. I was watching, I went out to the western side of Connecticut, and I was watching them switch. The Housatonic Railroad was switching Kimberly-Clark, which is a paper company.
Sure.
And I watched them. They shove a string of 5 box cars up the hill. Of course, they're 50-foot high cubes, and anybody knows me, my affinity for 50-foot high cubes, so definitely caught my attention.
They are awesome.
And they're shoving these cars in, and then I'm listening on the radio to them, and then they're talking, and they're like, "Hey, hang on a second, blah blah," and then a little bit of pause, and they said, take that other one back down the hill. They don't have room for it. Just the little tiny things, and it may sound silly to some, but to me, it was like, there's the human element, right?
Yeah.
It's like, oh, just drop 5 cars. Oh, mate, we brought 5. Oh, they're not ready for it. Take it back down. And, you can do so many neat things in your operating schemes like that, where you can add that human element to it and shake it up a little bit for your operators and make it different each time.
Yeah. And I could be wrong. I mean, JMRI might be able to do all of that for you automagically, if you will. But, I haven't been able to figure it out. I mean, I can just write it out on a spreadsheet and assign a couple of numbers to it. This car goes on to, an off spot for this session or whatever. And then boom, it's done. It's in the system. And then the dice roll is going to determine whether or not that happens during my operating session or not. It feels a little more difficult on some of those other pieces of software to kind of get them to bend in that way for your layout. So.
Well, it's those software that software may be great and certainly is. I don't think it's always a one size fits all either.
Sure.
That software may be great for one thing and then yours for another.
Yeah, absolutely.
Depending upon the user, just like YouTube channels and just like podcasts, just like everything. Not everything is for everybody. It's what works best for you. Maybe JMRI. Maybe what operating system works best for you. Is it Digitrax or NCE, or is it something else? Or it provides more variety, more options, and I think that's great that you've put this out there and provided it to folks to give it a try.
Yeah, if you have a large layout, you're running like 6 or 8 trains a session with hundreds of cars moving. Ops Buddy is probably a little too much work and a little too much effort to make it work. But if you have a small layout, you've got maybe 1 or 2 trains a session and you're moving maybe 20, 30 cars a session. I think it works very well for that type of situation.
I'll definitely be checking it out, and we'll share all these links as well in the show notes. So check that out. And we'll also share it on the Facebook page and also on aroundthelayout.com/podcasts, where you can check out all the other podcasts. And you can also see the links for all the things that we've talked about with Matt, including his YouTube channel. So Matt, before we wrap things up here on Around the Layout, what's next for your Metaline Falls Railroad?
Oh man. Well, it's all wired up now, which is great. I'm so happy about that because I hate wiring so much. So it's all wired, it's all running. So now now I'm getting into scenery. I played with scenery a little bit earlier this year, but now I'm really going to sort of buckle down and I'm really excited about that because that's my favorite part of the hobby is scenery. I love ballasting. I love, making tiny little bushes and, rock work and all that kind of stuff, trees. Those kind of touches on a monorail, I think is my favorite part of the hobby. So finally I'm to a point where I can really focus on that. The layout's fully operational, so it'll run. Now I got to make it look good. And so I'm really excited to do that. I'm going to start doing a lot more live work sessions as well. I kind of built myself a little setup so I can easily kind of move the a computer and the camera around the room and stuff. So wherever I'm working, I can have a camera kind of there, and sharing that with others. The live work sessions really kind of help motivate me and keep me going. So as I get scenery going, I'm going to be doing those live sessions, looking to do a lot more how-to videos along the way as well. So yeah, that's my plan.
Awesome. Well, we certainly appreciate you sharing all that with us, and there's certainly a lot to learn as you share your journey along with us, and you journal it in video form. And thank you for taking us along that ride, and thank you for joining me tonight. It's been a pleasure to talk with you and learn your model railroading journey, and looking forward to seeing what you got in store next.
Yeah, thanks so much. It's been a lot of fun.
Thank you for joining us for this episode of Around the Layout. Learn more about today's show on our Facebook page, facebook.com/Around the Layout. Show your support by becoming an operating crew member at patreon.com/Around the Layout podcast. Past episodes and more can be found on our website, aroundthelayout.com. And send us your feedback, aroundthelayout@gmail.com. Thanks for hanging out with us around the layout.